Ever get that feeling? Like someone's just not being real, like putting on a front.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what this deep dive is all about. That tricky difference between personality and persona.
Mm-hmm.
And to help us sort it all out, we're going deep with Paul Robinson's When We Get It Wrong.
Great book. It really gets you thinking.
It does. And I think one of the most interesting things Robinson points out is just how often these two terms, personality and persona, they get used like they mean the same thing,
Yeah.
but they don't.
Yeah.
And that's where the confusion, that's where things get messy.
For sure. And Robinson doesn't stop at definitions either.
Yeah.
He really makes you think about why this mix-up matters. Like, how does it change how we see people, public figures, influencers, even ourselves?
Okay, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's get those definitions straight. What is the difference between personality and persona? Hit me with it.
Okay, so imagine this. Personality, it's the whole package. Thoughts, feelings, all those little quirks you only your best friends know about. The real you. Right.
Right.
And then there's persona. Think of it think of that carefully crafted dish you serve to the world. It's the image you project, and honestly, sometimes it's made with a very specific goal in mind.
Okay, I'm getting a picture here. So is it kind of like my personality might be my messy kitchen with all these amazing smells coming from the oven, but my persona, that's that Instagram perfect photo of the finished meal.
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy. And it shows why this distinction matters so much, that we often judge the dish, as you put it, without knowing a single thing about what went on in the kitchen. And Robinson's point is that's how we end up misjudging people, especially those in the public eye.
Right. Like take politicians, for example. It's practically a given that they have to craft a persona.
Absolutely. And Robinson uses Paris Hilton as a great example of this. Remember that whole dumb blonde thing?
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't an accident. It was totally calculated. In fact, she even talks about this in her documentary, how it was all an act to build her brand.
Wow. She really committed to it, and it worked.
Oh.
But Robinson also talks about the flip side of this, the downside, right? What happens when, the persona kind of takes over?
Yeah, that's when things get complicated. He looks at actors like Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, Heath Ledger. They all struggled with blurring the lines between who they were and the roles they played.
So it's almost like they got trapped in their own creations.
Exactly. And what's so unsettling is that these were incredible talents, but it seemed like they lost their grip on their own identity somewhere along the way. And that's what's so striking about these examples Robinson uses. I mean, these were incredibly talented people. But Robinson isn't just focused on the downsides.
Oh.
Yeah, there's another side to this. He talks about how we can actually use this idea of crafting an image, this persona, as a way to improve ourselves.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying persona can actually be a good thing?
Oh, absolutely. It all comes down to how you use it. Think of it like this. You create an image of yourself, the best version, your ideal self, what Robinson calls the self-ideal, and then you start acting like that ideal. It's all about becoming who you want to be.
So it's kind of like if I want to be more confident, I should just act more confident even if I don't feel that way at first.
Exactly. And get this, the more you act that way, the more you actually start to embody those qualities. It's like rewiring your brain.
So instead of just faking it, I'm using this persona as a sort of guide for personal growth.
That's a great way to put it. It's about setting a goal and then taking real steps to become that person. Robinson uses Cary Grant as an example here. Grant actually said he became who he wanted to be by constantly acting, speaking, behaving like that person.
Interesting. So he basically created a persona and then actually grew into it. But, and maybe this is a silly question, but how do we know if we're using this persona idea the right way, like for actual growth and not just putting on a facade?
That's a really important question. It all comes down to self-awareness. You have to understand why you're doing it. Are you trying to impress people, or are you genuinely trying to become a better version of yourself?
Right. Okay, I get that. But it still feels like a slippery slope.
Yeah.
How do we make sure we're not just, fooling ourselves?
You've got a point there. That's why Robinson emphasizes the importance of checking in with yourself, being mindful and making sure you're not losing yourself in this whole act.
Okay, but isn't there a risk we get so caught up in creating this perfect image that we lose sight of who we really are?
Absolutely. And that's where it all ties into the world we live in today, especially with social media. Think about how much effort people put into curating their online presence.
Oh, it's constant.
Right. It's like everyone's trying to project this idealized version of themselves, hoping to rack up likes and get validation.
It's true. And it's hard not to compare yourself to all those perfectly filtered photos and those carefully worded captions.
And this is where social engineering comes in. Robinson makes this point that with the right help, image consultants, PR gurus, you can create a desirable personality from scratch. It's all smoke and mirrors.
So you're saying we can't always trust what we see. Like even the most charismatic people, even the super successful ones, maybe they're just really good at playing a role.
It's something to think about. Robinson actually uses Ronald Reagan as an example. He argues that Reagan was a so-so actor, but a great president. And it's because he projected this carefully constructed persona. He embodied, that American ideal. Whether it was real or not is the question.
Oh, okay. So are we all just getting duped by these carefully made images? I mean, can we even be authentic in a world where everyone's trying to be the best version of themselves online?
That's the big question. And honestly, I don't think there's a simple answer. But I do think the first step is being aware of it. We need to be aware that there's potential for manipulation, that there are people out there trying to influence us with images and messages.
That we need to be more critical, like more careful about what we're consuming.
Yeah, we need to be skeptical, question what we see, look deeper than the surface, try to figure out what's motivating the images we're being shown.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. But how do we actually do that? Like, how can we get better at spotting these manufactured personalities?
Well, one way is to pay attention to inconsistencies. Does their online persona match up with how they act in real life? Do they come across as genuine, or are they always putting on a show?
So we're looking for those moments when the mask slips, when the real person shows through.
Exactly. And it's also about being aware of our own biases. What are we drawn to? Who do we admire? And why?
You're right. We all have our own preferences, our own filters. It's easy to be swayed by someone who fits our idea of what a successful or charismatic or attractive person should be.
And that's why it's so crucial to have a strong sense of self. The more secure you are in who you are, the less you need that external validation, the less you need to project an image to feel good.
So it's not about rejecting the idea of persona altogether. It's about using it in a mindful way, both for self-improvement and for navigating this world where image is everything.
That's it. It's about striking a balance, being authentic while still striving to be the best version of yourself.
This has been really eye-opening. I feel like I understand so much more about personality and persona now, but I have to admit, I'm also feeling a bit overwhelmed. Like, how do we actually put all of this into practice?
That's a great question, and it's one that Robinson addresses in the rest of the book. He actually offers some pretty practical strategies for dealing with all of this, for becoming more aware of the images we're constantly being fed.
Okay, so there's hope. We're not just going to be puppets for these master persona creators, right?
Not at all. We have the power to choose what we believe, what we let in, and what we say no to. But it takes effort. It takes being aware, and it takes a willingness to question everything we see and hear.
Wow. There's a lot to think about. But it's important, right? We're talking about how we navigate the modern world, a world where image is power and authenticity is hard to find.
Exactly. And in a world like that, understanding this difference between personality and persona, it's more important than ever. It's about recognizing how powerful image making is, both in our own lives and in the world around us.
So we need to become more, more media literate, more aware of how our perceptions are shaped.
That's the idea. And the good thing is, once you start to see how it all works, once you see the strings, you can't unsee them. You start to see those inconsistencies, those little cues, the moments when the persona cracks, and you get a glimpse of the real person.
It's like discovering a whole new world. One where we're not just passively taking in images, but actually engaging with them, questioning them, breaking them down.
And that puts you in a much more powerful position. You're not just a puppet being controlled by these illusions. You're in control, choosing what you believe in, what you reject, what you admire, and what you question.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the dangers here, the potential for manipulation, that blurring between reality and fantasy. But I want to go back to that idea, using persona in a positive way, like for self-improvement.
Right, that whole concept of the self-ideal.
Robinson talks about Cary Grant and how he basically became the person he wanted to be.
Yeah, he was very deliberate about crafting his persona.
So it's not just about faking it until you make it then.
It's more about intention, like setting a goal and then constantly taking steps to reach it. You want to be more confident, act more confident, even if you don't feel it at first. You're basically training your mind to match that image.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we avoid falling into the trap of creating a persona that's not really us? Like, where's the line between self-improvement and just playing a part?
Self-awareness is key. You have to constantly check in with yourself. Ask yourself, am I being genuine or am I trying to be someone I'm not?
So it's all about checking in, reflecting. But let's be real, it's easy to get caught up in this whole curated persona thing, especially with social media. How do we resist that urge to project that perfect image all the time?
Oh, I know what you mean. It's tough. But Robinson's argument is that understanding how persona works, like the mechanics of it, that can actually help us resist it. The more we see those illusions for what they are, the less likely we are to fall for them.
So it's about being more media savvy, more critical of all those images and messages we see every day.
Absolutely. And it's not about rejecting persona completely. It's about using it in a smart way for personal growth and for navigating a world obsessed with image.
This deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I see this whole personality persona thing in a whole new light. Any last words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap things up?
You know, I think the biggest takeaway here is mindfulness. Pay attention to the personas you see, both in yourself and in others. Question what you see. Don't just accept the stories you're being told. And maybe most importantly, stay true to who you are, even as you explore the possibilities of persona and self-creation.
That's great advice. And on that note, we'll leave you to think about all this and see how it applies to your own life.
Okay.
Until next time, keep exploring.